Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, and good night, wherever you're joining us today in today's live lecture coming to you from Nkolo Mahadum Wisdom University. Today's date is Eke Market Day in the Igbo lunar calendar, and in the foreign Roman Catholic calendar, today's date is 9/30/2025. And remember, at Nkolo Mahadum, we always advise you to use your naturally given common sense, which we call Akonuche in Igbo language. And also, we are primarily set up to decolonize your brain, to provide you with the accurate information than the miseducation, misinformation, and misdirection from our colonial masters. And we package and present our lectures from the Igbo man, the Biafran, and African perspectives, because we believe that we shall be seeing things the way it concerns us, not how it concerns other cultures. Because other cultures protect their values and way of life. And we, the Igbo people, the Biafran people, and Africans, should also protect our values and way of life and try to sell them to other cultures. And we want you to join us, subscribe, follow us on YouTube, Facebook, Twitter, and TikTok. Right now, we are live on YouTube, we are live on Facebook, and we are live on Twitter. And the title of today's lecture is The United Nations, the 80th anniversary of United Nations currently going on in New York, indicates that that organization, the United Nations, is a failure. So far, we at Nkolo Mahadum Wisdom University is concluding, based on what has been going on and what is currently going on, that the United Nations, as currently constituted, the United Nations as currently made up, as currently constituted, is a failure in the, not only for the world, but for the Africans and for the Biafran people and Igbo people. That is how you should be seeing it. Because now the whole world leaders are gathered in New York again for the every year jamboree. And before we continue, we have to give you some historical perspective about the United Nations. The United Nations, according to the information from the United Nations Archive, started immediately the Second World War was about to end. That was when the United Nations started. And about 50 countries gathered in San Francisco in the United States from April 25 to June 26, 1945. From April 25 to June 26, 1945. So that they can have an organization that will now usher for peace, for dignity, and equality of everybody in the world, having come out from the Second World War. Everybody wants peace. Everybody wants dignity. Everybody wants equality for every human being on this earth. And the United Nations officially began on October 24, 1945. And the headquarters was moved to New York in 1952. And in the United Nations, you have an arm called the Security Council. It is in the Security Councils that our decisions are made. And in that Security Council, you have 5 countries that won the Second World War that have permanent membership of the Security Council and veto power. And the countries include United States, United Kingdom, France, China, and Russia. All 5 countries have permanent membership of the Security Council and then veto power. And if you look at it, the constitution, that is the constituents, these countries that made up this Security Council that have permanent membership and veto power, was not based on their population. Because if all human beings are equal, everything should be done on population. For example, United States has a population of 326.7 million. United Kingdom have only 66.4 million. France has only 66.98 million. China has 1.393 billion. Russia has 144.5 million in population. So if all human beings are created equal, if the Security Council is made up of, is based on population, it's only China that is worthy to be there. It is only China. Because if you look at other countries or other continents that are not in the Security Council, Africa has 1.3 billion. They are not in the Security Council. India has 1.5 billion. They are not in the Security Council. They don't have any Security Council seats. Talk less of being permanent or even with veto power. They don't. And so, with all the disagreements in the Security Council, because in that Security Council, with their veto power, America has vetoed more resolutions against Israel and other parts of the world in support of the Israeli government. Because with veto power, once any of them says no, it is that no that will take place. And so the way that the United Nations is made up calls for question. And we are calling that the United Nations, as presently constituted, as presently organized, should be scrapped. It should be scrapped because it's not working. It's not working. If you look at the war going on in the Middle East with Israel and Palestinian and Syria and Yemen and Lebanon and Iran and the Russian-Ukraine war and the one going on in Sudan and Somalia and the killings in Syria, Nigeria, the Fulani herdsmen terrorists killing people in Nigeria, and the militarization of the Biafran land, and illegal arrest and detention of Mazen Nnamdi Kanu. These are things that the United Nations should have resolved. And in the past, we have witnessed a lot of wars: the Iraqi war, the Libyan war, the Afghanistan war, the bombing of Yugoslavia, to mention a few. And injustices of imposing sanctions on Cuba, using sanctions as a weapon against Russia, against Venezuela, against so many countries. And the Western countries, the European countries, using their corporations, their companies to exploit and sometimes support terrorism across Africa. So the United Nations, as it is now, is a failure and should be scrapped from our own analysis, from our own evaluation, this evaluation coming from Nkola Mahadum Wisdom University. And before we proceed, we have to show you some clips to let you know what is going on in the United Nations today, what has been going on in the past, because Robert Mugabe, our able African statesman, before he died, he made a lot of comments about the inequality in the United Nations. And he's been crying. And so are other world leaders today. Everybody is crying. Nobody is talking good about United Nations. So what use is United Nations if to make the world better? What are they doing to make the world better? We have not seen much. And so we have to continue now by showing you few clips of what many leaders have said and what they continue to say about the situation in the United Nations and the situation in the world. So let's go.
We are supposed to be free and independent, Mr. Ban Ki-moon. Supposed to be free, the 54 countries. We come to the United Nations, it's ceremonial. Every year, September, we are there. We pay lots of money to go there. And to the General Assembly, we make speeches, we go back home, year in, year out. But the bosses in the Security Council say, you shall never have the powers that we have.
This is Robert Mugabe saying that every year they come here every year and make speeches. Every year speeches are made. But no, all the problems in the world, none is being solved. They just come there every year, they pay money, they talk, everybody talks and go. The whole problem stays. It stays, it doesn't make sense. And the bosses in the Security Council, we say, you are not equal like us. This is not an equal world. That's why United Nations should be scrapped.
As permanent members. And we have asked and asked and asked. And asked and asked. Reform the Security Council.
That's what Robert Mugabe is saying here. Those people in the Security Council that are permanent with veto power, they believe that they have the world, they are the one controlling the world. Whatever they say goes. They believe that others are not equal like them. Then what is the need of creating an organization that says that they want to see peace, dignity, and equality for everybody? What is the essence? So, having shown you what Robert Mugabe said, let us proceed with other things that are happening in the United Nations of today. And we have to start with President Trump.
President Trump just wrapping his remarks at the UN General Assembly after nearly an hour of speaking there. The president taking a hard line with the United Nations, questioning the purpose of the organization, saying it's not coming close to living up to its potential. President Trump also accusing the UN of not helping solve conflicts around the world and claiming that the body is supporting illegal immigration. We even heard about both his teleprompter as well as an escalator that was not working on his way in. We want to bring in NBC's Garrett Hake. He is in New York City at the UN for us. Garrett, in just a moment, we're going to cover what's sort of a highly anticipated topic here this week at the United Nations General Assembly, which is the war in Gaza, of course, and I'll touch on his comments. But with you first, I think sort of striking in an audience of this nature, of other world leaders, we heard such a focus. First, the president, as expected, touting accomplishments, calling this the golden age for America, but also really stressing what he clearly sees as a success, this immigration crackdown, and sort of encouraging this for other world leaders in that room. Same thing with what he's calling the green energy scam, calling carbon footprint a hoax. Tell us what you heard there that stood out to you, Garrett.
Yeah, Savannah, a stem winder from the president, nearly an hour in length, at times boastful about the U.S.'s record, and at times a lecture to the United Nations itself. You heard him say that he thinks it's only good for words and strongly worded letters when it comes to the global crises it should be trying to solve. And then the president really lecturing European leaders in particular on issues of immigration, suggesting they should copy the asylum policies of the United States and be much more aggressive about protecting their own borders, and on energy, declaring climate change and things like a carbon footprint to be a hoax, saying that he has pressed leaders, including British Prime Minister Keir Starmer during their visit last week, to focus on domestic energy production in the North Sea and to get rid of renewable energy sources that he's long not believed in. Savannah, covering the president for a long time, a lot of this speech felt familiar. It felt like a campaign speech. Highly unusual to see a speech of that nature delivered to an audience like this. But the president relishes these moments. The previews from his team suggested that he viewed this as going into the lion's den to try to tell, in his mind, difficult truths to foreign leaders who otherwise wouldn't hear them. He also pressured European leaders again in specific to cut off what remains of their energy purchases from Russia, suggesting that he's willing to go further on tougher sanctions, tougher tariffs on Russia in terms of pressuring them to end the war in Ukraine, but only if Europe is willing to go all the way with them. So a pretty aggressive speech on several fronts from the president, who now has a day of meetings with many of these same leaders to follow.
Okay, even President Trump was criticizing the UN, that they're not living up to expectation. They're not doing what they're supposed to do. And he's there also telling the European leaders to stop buying oil from Russian oil, that he will put more sanctions on Russia. So that will tell you. And Russia and the United States are in the Security Council. In the Security Council, they are fighting themselves. They are fighting themselves. They are not united. In the United Nations, it's not united. Not even in the Security Council, they're not united. So if you're not united in the United Nations, it shows that the world is also not united. So United Nations could not be said to be a disunited organization. It's a disunited organization. So we're going to pause it there. That was President Trump making his own remark at the United Nations. Let's continue with what other leaders said in the current United Nations conference going on. Let us go to Lavrov of Russia.
His Excellency Sergei Lavrov, Minister for Federation.
Madam President, ladies and gentlemen, 80 years ago, the most terrible war in human history came to an end. More than 70 million people fell victim to the fighting, famine, and disease. In 1945, the course of world history changed forever. The triumph over German Nazism, under whose banner most of Europe had rallied, and Japanese militarism paved the way for peace, recovery, and prosperity. This year, Moscow and Beijing held celebrations devoted to the 9th of May and 3rd of September holidays to mark the victory in the Great Patriotic War and World War II. The world witnessed grand military parades commemorating the decisive contribution of the peoples of the Soviet Union to the defeat of Nazi Germany and the particular...
Before we continue here, I want you to realize that Sergei Lavrov was speaking in Russian language. Lavrov was speaking in Russian language, and an interpreter was interpreting. Imagine that Biafra is a country. Imagine that if Biafra becomes if we restore the Biafran nation, and a Biafran president or Biafran leader goes to the UN and be speaking Igbo, And the Igbo he is speaking is being translated. That is how we want you to be seeing things. You don't just be seeing things, you see other leaders come to the United Nations, or you see them every time speaking their language. Imagine if we have our own country and we are speaking Igbo. That will make Igbo language one of the most important languages in the world. So let's keep listening to Lavrov.
All of the people of China in defeating militaristic Japan. We sacredly honor the memory of our brotherhood in arms with all of our allies who stood on the side of truth in the fight against the forces of evil. One of the enduring outcomes of that war was the creation of the United Nations. The principles of its charter agreed upon by the founding fathers of our organization continue to serve as a shining beacon of international cooperation. They embody centuries of experience of the coexistence of states and remain fully relevant in the age of multipolarity. The only thing that remains is for all member states, without exception, to adhere to those principles in full, in their entirety, and as they are interconnected. In practice, however, things look different. Widespread gross violations of the principle of the sovereign equality of states are undermining faith in justice itself and leading to crises and conflicts. The root of the problem lies in the incessant attempts to divide the world into us and them, into democracy and autocracy, into a blooming garden and a jungle, those who are at the table and those who are on the menu, into the chosen ones who are allowed everything and the rest who for some reason are obliged to serve the interests of the golden billion. We advocate for unquestioning adherence to the principle of equality. It is the guarantee that all countries will be able to take their rightful place in the world order, regardless of their military might, the size of their population, or the size of their territory and economy.
Let's stop this one here, because Lavrov started from how they fought the war, defeating Nazism, defeating Japan, and now formed the United Nations for peace and dignity and equality. But now that the United Nations is divided, people are divided, people are imposing and stopping other countries from having their own sovereignty, having their own freedom to operate the way they want, dividing, the world, dividing everybody according to this and that and that. There's no peace in the world. That is what Lavrov is saying. So let me stop the one from Lavrov, and continue with another highlight from this ongoing United Nations conference. Let's go to Netanyahu, Bibi Netanyahu.
The Assembly will hear an address by His Excellency Benjamin Netanyahu, Prime Minister of the State of Israel. I request protocol to escort His Excellency and invite him to address the Assembly. Please, order in the hall. Please, order in the hall. Please, order in the hall. Please, order in the hall.
This is what I want you to see here. How, when the Israeli Prime Minister came to speak, how almost the whole world walked away from that conference hall. almost the whole world walked away from the conference hall of the United Nations where Benjamin Netanyahu was about to speak. And you guys know why. Because of the ongoing genocide in Gaza. Because the whole world is against it. There have been so many resolutions in the United Nations to stop these killings. But United States and Britain veto those resolutions to stop the war. You can see the type of world we live in. Yet, he's allowed to speak. Even though majority of the people walked away from him, he was still allowed to speak. That tells you that the United Nations, the world we live in, is in disunity. So let's pick another video to show you what's going on in the United Nations conference in the 80th anniversary of the United Nations. Let's keep watching.
The Assembly will hear an address by His Excellency Reem Talba San Emmanuel Ouedraogo, Prime Minister and Head of Government of Burkina Faso. I request protocol to escort His Excellency and invite him to address the Assembly.
Before he will speak, I want to let you know the reason why we chose the Prime Minister of Burkina Faso in this lecture, because Burkina Faso, Mali, and Niger is the future of Africa. They are the future of Africa because they are the ones that have taken the bull by the horn to control their land and people and resources, driving away foreign colonialists, driving away foreigners who were colonizing and exploiting their people and their land. They are the future of Africa, not African Union. That is why we chose this, this video that represents Burkina Faso, that represents the future of Africa. Now, let's listen to him, what he wants to say.
Madame la Présidente,
Madam President, Secretary General of the United Nations, Heads of Delegation, distinguished delegates, ladies and gentlemen, it is my great honor and privilege to address you on behalf of President Captain Ibrahim Traoré, President of Burkina Faso, Head of State, during this session to convey the voice of the dignified, honest people of Burkina Faso. I would therefore like to convey fraternal greetings to you, to all citizens of the world committed to peace and freedom. Madam President, on behalf of Burkina Faso, I would like warmly to congratulate you upon your election to the presidency of this, the 80th session. Your election bears witness to the trust of the international community in your leadership, your ability to listen to other views, and to dialogue. In Burkina Faso, you will find a sincere, constructive, and committed partner. I would also like to express my gratitude to your predecessor, Mr. Philemon Yang. My gratitude for the high quality and rigor of the work he undertook during the previous session. Madam President, distinguished delegates, ladies and gentlemen, Burkina Faso fully aligns itself with the statement delivered on behalf of the Alliance of Sahel States by the Republic of Mali.
together with Niger as well, we belong to a community of aspirations in a forum of renaissance and breaking with the past. Secretary General, Burkina Faso would like to pay tribute to the work of the UN system and its...
They are saying he can, okay, another take away from what he's saying. He's speaking in his own language. He's not speaking English. The same way when we have Biafra, the same way we shall be sending our representatives to the United Nations and they'll be speaking Igbo. And then an interpreter will be interpreting. And he said that they are in partner, they are in alliance, they concur with the alliance of Sahel states as presented by the Malian government. And also that they are moving away from the past. What is that past? The past is exploitation, neocolonialism, colonialism, imposition of everything. They want to be free. So let's continue to listen to him.
Partners in this common quest for stability and prosperity. The present meeting, which is being held 80 years after the adoption of the United Nations Charter, is a suitable opportunity for us to take stock candidly of what our organization has achieved. And that is what the topic for this meeting suggests that we do. Better together, 80 years and more for peace, development, and human rights. This is fully relevant in light of our mutual commitment to bring about a world that is more just and to build more effective multilateralism. It is therefore part of this approach that should guide every nation, every sub-regional, regional, and international group. This is...
What he's saying is that they want to support a world of multilateralism, that is the multipolar world, not the current unipolar world. That's what he's saying. Because multipolarism, that is many people having a voice than just one or two, telling everybody what to do, is what the world wants. That's what he's saying. And when I take a few more from here and then we'll move on to another slide.
The Oak anniversary after 80 years that should really lead for us to carry out an introspective assessment of what we have achieved. Rather than being a cause for celebration, this anniversary is in fact akin to looking at an embarrassing fiasco, a collective disappointment, and a structural failure. Because we have to be honest with ourselves, we should humbly recognize that even though globally there have been some achievements, there is rather a negative backdrop as a result of 8 decades of optimism that have been sorely put to the test, 8 decades of disappointment, 8 decades of shattered dreams, 8 decades of failure to meet the moment, in a nutshell. That is unfortunately the bleak picture of a UN that many of our forefathers from 1945, if they were still alive, would have struggled to accept. It is therefore difficult to celebrate given such a mixed backdrop to this anniversary. How can we understand the fact that Africa, the cradle of humanity, and where there are so many conflicts, and which represent...
He's saying that there's nothing to celebrate. At this 80th anniversary, there's nothing to celebrate because United Nations have not performed admirably. They have not performed well. That is what he's saying. And we'll leave it from there. If you want to get the full detail, please go and look for it and get the full detail of what he said in that at the UN. So we're going to move on to the next slide to tell you what is going on at the United Nations. The next slide we're going to take is This one from Indonesia.
I would like to call on the next speaker. The Assembly will hear an address by His Excellency Prabowo Subianto, President of the Republic of Indonesia. I request protocol to escort His Excellency and invite him to address the Assembly.
His Excellency, Mr. Antonio Guterres, Secretary General of the United Nations, Her Excellency, Madame Annalena Baerbock, President of the United Nations General Assembly, His Excellency, Mr. Moses Abelian, Under Secretary General for General Assembly and Management, Excellencies, Heads of States, Heads of Governments, distinguished delegates, ladies and gentlemen. It is indeed a great honor for me to stand in this August General Assembly Hall among leaders and representatives who represent almost all of humanity. We differ in race, religion, and nationality, yet we gather together today as one human family. We are here first and foremost as fellow human beings, each created equal, endowed with unalienable rights to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. The words of the United Nations Declaration of Independence have inspired democratic movements across continents, including the French Revolution, the Russian Revolution, the Mexican Revolution, the Chinese Revolution, and Indonesia's own struggle and journey to freedom. It also gave birth to the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, adopted by the United Nations in 1948. All men are created equal was the creed that opened the way to unprecedented global prosperity and dignity. And yet, in our own era of scientific and technological triumphs, an era capable of ending hunger, poverty, and environmental ruin, we also continue to face today grave dangers, challenges, and uncertainties. Human folly, fueled by fear, racism, hatred, oppression, and apartheid, threatens our common future. My country knows this pain. For centuries, Indonesians lived under colonial domination, oppression, and slavery. We were treated less than dogs in our own homeland. We Indonesians know what it means to be denied justice and what it means to live in apartheid, to live in poverty, and to be denied equal opportunity. We also knew what solidarity can do in our struggle for independence, in our fight to overcome hunger, disease, and poverty. The United Nations stood with Indonesia and gave us vital assistance. Decisions made here based on human solidarity by the Security Council and this Assembly gave Indonesia independence, international legitimacy, opened doors, and supported our early development through the efforts of the United Nations Children Fund, the United Nations Food and Agriculture Organization, the FAO, the World Health Organization, and many, many other United Nations institutions. And because of that, Indonesia today stands on the cusp of shared prosperity and greater equality and dignity. Madam President, Excellencies, our world today is driven by conflict, injustice, and deepening uncertainty. Every day we witness suffering, genocide, and blatant disregard for international law and human decency. In the face of these challenges, we must not give up.
You heard what the Indonesian leader is saying? That the world is created equal. Every human being is created equal. But in the affairs of nations, they from Indonesia, they have been suffering. They have undergone so many killings, so many discrimination, so many bad influence from colonial masters, that they've been suffering. They need justice. So this cry is coming from all over the world. Every section of the world is crying against the inability of the United Nations to do what is right for all mankind. This is why we want to choose just few videos to let you know what is going on in the United Nations, for you to agree with us that United Nations, as is currently being operated, is a failure. It's a very, very, very big failure. Now, let's take the last video, and then we will conclude this segment of our lecture. And this one is coming from Brazilian President Lula.
Madam President of the General Assembly, Analina Berbuki, Mr. Secretary General Antonio Guterres, dear heads of state and government, and representatives of the member states gathered here. This should be a time to celebrate the United Nations. Created at the end of the war, the UN symbolizes the highest expression of the aspiration for peace and prosperity. Today, however, the ideals that inspired its founders in San Francisco are under threat as never before in their history. Multilateralism is at a new crossroads. The organization's authority is in check. We are witnessing the consolidation of an international order marked by repeated concessions to power play, attacks on sovereignty, arbitrary sanctions, and unilateral interventions are becoming the rule. There is a clear parallel between the multilateralism crisis and the weakening of democracy. Authoritarianism is strengthened when we fail to act in the face of arbitrary acts, when the international society falters in defending peace, sovereignty, and the rule of law. The consequences are tragic. Throughout the world, anti-democratic forces are trying to subjugate institutions and stifle freedoms. They worship violence, praise ignorance, act as physical and digital militias, and restrict the press. Even under an unprecedented attack, Brazil chose to resist and defend its democracy, regained 40 years ago by its people after 2 decades of dictatorial governments. There is no justification for unilateral and arbitrary measures against our institutions and our economy. The aggression against the independence of the judiciary branch of power is unacceptable. This interference in domestic affairs is aided by a subservient far right who is nostalgic of past hegemonies. False patriots plan and publicly promote actions against Brazil. Peace cannot be achieved with impunity. A few days ago, and for the first time in 525 years of our history.
You have heard it from the Brazilian President Lula. He's also complaining about what is going on in his country. That unilateralism, that is unipolar world, people pursuing the unipolar world, they are interfering in every country, damaging the institutions, even in their own country. The judiciary is no longer what is supposed to be. And so they are interfering in other countries, both in their elections, both in their institutions, so that everything will be in their favor and not to the people. So the cry is all over the place to support our assertion, to support our conclusion that the United Nations, as currently constituted and being managed, is a failure and should be scrapped, so that another organization that will take care and meet the objective of peace, dignity, and equality of all human beings on this earth can come up. That is what we at Nkola Mahadum is advocating for. Because the current United Nations, as presently constituted with the permanent members and their veto power, without regard to every other human being. I have presented here to you the population of UK, 66.4 million. France, 66.98 million. United States, 326.7 million. Russia, 144.5 million. They are the people making decisions for the whole world. Why Africa, with 1.3 billion, India with almost 1.5 billion, is nowhere to be found. They have no seat in the Security Council. Doesn't have a say what is going on. That is a wrong way to organize a united organization like the United Nations, which is supposed to take care of everybody in the world. And we are calling on all people across the world to stand up so that the injustices in the United Nations should be corrected or scrapped completely, so that a new organization can rise that can take care of every human being on this earth. And with this, we shall be bringing today's lecture to an end. Thank you very much for joining us today, and have a very, very good day. Thank you. Have a good one. Bye-bye.